Warren come down from Connecticut to present for us tonight. I think I contacted Warren about a year ago, which is about the time when I schedule most people. And he's a field investigator for MUFON, and he came very highly recommended to me. So let me tell you a little bit about Warren's background. He's always been fascinated with space. His father worked for NASA as an engineer and was he tested the space suits before the astronauts wore them in space. And if you have a chance, you'll be able to come up here and look at some of his pictures he brought of those missions that his dad worked on. So Warren, of course, having a father like that, he excelled and was a gifted student, so he excelled in math, science, and was placed in a gifted educational program. He also studied music from a very early age. He went on to Indiana University, where he was beginning to study medicine and music, but ultimately graduated with kind of an independent major study, which was new in those days when we were in college. And it focused on math, physics, and computer sciences with a minor in music. One of his senior projects was a computer-controlled laser system, which he designed and worked on, and that landed him his very first job in laser engineering in Los Angeles for a medical company. He worked there for a couple of years and was headhunted away by Hughes Aircraft, where he worked as a laser engineer on a secret Department of Defense program. Not being interested in working on a defense program and being a bit of a pacifist, he switched careers and went into software development, went back to California and worked for Paramount Studios for a number of years. That led to a job at Sony, where he developed their product known as PlayStation as a software engineer. So after 3 years of producing video games, then he was headhunted away to work for Pfizer in New York City in their web development program. Once they outsourced this program, he took a director position with an ad agency doing software development. Everything in his life changed dramatically in 2002, if I have that date right. He received a very profound telepathic message that was downloaded from what best he can describe was an extraterrestrial ethereal being. And this download of information lasted for 5 days. He was given and downloaded mathematical formulas, certain universal concepts, and metaphysical truths. This led to the creation of an invention he developed called Magna Blocks, which was an award-winning construction toy. He has 1 or 2 of them here, or a few of them. These are the last that exist on the planet. The company eventually went out of business for a number of other reasons, but he developed a toy company and developed toys probably as an educational focus for young children to understand magnetics and the platonic solids and geometry and math and things like that. It's part of what he was downloaded to do. He also received downloaded information on a conceptual idea he terms as tetraphonics, which is a 4D sound system. This download of information described itself to Warren as a consciousness wave, which he was able to pick up or tune into, sort of like an antenna. And it was a broadcast of information. Other people also picked up things during this time. I know for me it was an extremely powerful period of time where I got involved in crop circles and sacred geometry in England. And he said this was only possible because of a planetary alignment that occurs only once every 1,000 years. The download intensified Warren's awareness of sacred geometry, helping him to develop his current research into sphereology. This is what we were talking about, this tetrahedral 4D sound system. It's a form of new mathematics. It's a methodology to study spherical geometry. And Warren recognized that all life forms emerge from this spherical toroidal or helix spheroids type of geometry. And the sooner we begin to understand that as scientists and mathematicians, the sooner we'll be able to make greater progress in our future sciences. So Warren has always had an instinctive knowledge that extraterrestrial intelligence existed throughout the universe. In 2014, Warren had a daylight sighting near Danbury Airport in Connecticut, near where he lived, with 2 other witnesses. They saw a metallic orb that was about 30 to 50 feet in diameter, hovering silently about 800 feet above them. After this event, he joined the Mutual UFO Network and became a field investigator. Warren now devotes his time to continuing UFO investigations and developing technology, new technologies based on this inspirational download. He is in the process of writing a book that's entitled Inventing Magna Blocks, which is this product here, and that will be available in 2020. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Warren.
Wow, that was some introduction. I don't think I need to do any more talking. Bye. Okay, where shall we begin? All right, so I'm very blessed in my life. I've had an extremely interesting life. And just luck of the draw, I guess, however it works in the big picture. Ufology is one of these areas of science that leads down many rabbit holes. And indeed, I'm sure as all of us who've been looking at the phenomena for a long time, start to realize all of the mis and disinformation that we're given through the standard channels, education and media. And we're seeing a lot of these lies being highlighted now, which is terrific. But certainly ufology, there's been quite a few pieces of information that have come out that you kind of go, wow, well, is it true or is it not? And how can we validate that? Because of my scientific background, I'm very big on evidence and reasoning and common sense and deduction and statistical analysis as well. Because, you know, if we follow this research and we try and separate the wheat from the chaff, there's quite a bit of very profound things that come out of the field. Now, the past year, we've seen a lot of very interesting developments in ufology and again in the truth movement, something I'm a big supporter of. Now, what I'm going to share with you tonight will blow your mind. And it's important to realize that all the things we've been taught, well, not everything you know is wrong, but let me I'll make a good point of this, okay? I'd like to start off with this, okay? If you doubt the fact that everything you know is wrong, who's the first president of the United States?
George Washington. Thomas Jefferson.
No, sorry. Turns out John Hanson of Maryland was the first president of the United States. George Washington was the 9th. George Washington was the first paid president. That's the key differentiator. Also, he was the first president after the Constitutional Congress was ratified. But more to the point, like, why did they not tell us that? Why don't they just teach us that John Hanson was the actual first president of the United States, and George was the 9th after, you know, the first 8 guys worked for free. They had a term, I think it was 1 year or 2 years, but they worked purely because they felt like it was their duty to create the country. And my, how things have shifted in this, right? So not everything you know is wrong, but you should listen to this album. This is Fireside Theater's hilarious, so I highly recommend it if you want to have a good laugh, but yet be awakened at the same token. That's a very fun album. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? I'm going to touch a bit about my background, which Jennifer did a great job describing. She covered really most of this stuff, but I'll drill down a little bit of that. And then we're going to talk about the recent information that's come out in the past year or so, and kind of going through how we might analyze this. Okay, so this is an important thing to realize, that in ufology, really it's all speculation. I mean, there's small pieces of evidence, but even amongst the evidence, that there's so much debate on a lot of it, that until you can really shake the hand of an extraterrestrial or step inside an anti-gravity vehicle, it's kind of all speculation, you know. We see lights in the sky, and as a field investigator, you get a lot of these calls where, yes, I saw a light in the sky, right? And like, okay, great, next. It's really not that interesting. And we need to have the concrete evidence. And what I'm doing now in ufology is focusing a lot on the CE5, the Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind protocol, where it's human-initiated contact. And I think that this is how I had my first sighting in 2014. I spent the whole day meditating, reaching out, trying to contact an extraterrestrial presence, and lo and behold, after about 7 to 8 hours of meditation, one appeared, and it just blew my mind. It was incredible. What's that?
8 hours?
Yeah, that's about the whole day. I was, I mean, not constantly. I would meditate for, half an hour. I would read for half an hour. I'd meditate for an hour. But anyway, it took a lot of effort. And in fact, trying to reproduce that, I haven't had as good a result as I had that first day. So I'm not very good at meditating. I'm not very good at CE5, but I'm trying. And hopefully we're working on some things that will move that along. There's also, again, much disinformation. There's a really good book, Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper, and he identified this a long time ago in the 80s about how much disinformation there is. What's interesting, my CE5 buddy, who got me into the group in Connecticut, he worked for the NSA, so he shared with me some interesting insights from that. And then a very interesting coincidence, the universe is an amazing place. I couldn't go to my 40th high school reunion on Saturday because I had to work, but the night before, people who couldn't attend on the Saturday came on the Friday, and a guy I haven't seen in 40 years, turns out he works for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and his boss was Thomas Wilson, Admiral Thomas Wilson, and we're going to talk about the Wilson memo leak. So it's really interesting the way things can come full circle sometime. So within the disinformation, a lot of contradictions in the information. One of the things that I struggle with is you hear the different accounts, even like with Roswell. Stan Friedman did a really good book on his crash at Corona, and he talks about, there was Socorro, New Mexico, there was Corona, there was Roswell. Was it one crash, two crashes, was it two discs? There's speculation about all these different things. One was an archaeological find, another one was a recent crash. So in the truth amongst all of these contradictory stories, it's really tough to sift through that. So you have to keep your mind open. You have to look at where the consistencies of the stories are, and that's really important, to try and find the overlaps where everybody says, yeah, this is what we saw, yeah, we saw the same thing. And you've got to try and believe people. Most people at face value, I think, are telling the truth. And I think that if we look at a lot of the people that, even though they just have an anecdotal story, or they are just an eyewitness, but all they're telling you is a story, yeah, you'd be skeptical, but I think most of these people are telling the truth the best as they can based upon their experience. But the experiences can be really weird. It's key to have discernment, and again, apply some statistical modeling can help resolve the conflicts that come up. My friend Jerry, again, the CE5 gentleman, so he has something that he created called the Birdsall debunker axiom. His last name is Birdsall. And he says that those who deny extraterrestrials existing come in just these four categories. It's like two guys. They're either clueless adults, poor researchers or bad scientists, or compromised, or compromised like there's some other agendas driving them, but it's not the truth. Or they're paid liars, whether they're scientists or just debunkers. And he says that's it. There's no other option. You're one of those three if you deny extraterrestrials. So I agree with him in general that denying extraterrestrial reality is kind of foolish based upon the evidence. And when you have a sighting, when you see what I saw, and I'm sure other people have had sightings too. I've always known my whole life that sentient life is probably all through the universe. It just instinctually feels right. But this is where when you see one, something changes and you go, wow, everything I believe, it's true. Wow, and it makes you see things with a fresh new set of eyes. Okay, and then also that there's really no ufology experts in the way. I'm not certainly no expert, and even though I've studied this for a long time, anyone who will go out there and say, I'm telling the only truth, like Billy Meyer, who has a really interesting case, and I think he's a legitimate contactee, but he says stuff like, well, he's the only contactee. Well, no, he isn't. I don't believe that for a second. So sometimes what happens is that people get compromised by just human nature. Stan Romanek, another guy, clearly had contact, but they get into this kind of they fall victim to their ego and they become gurus, type of and not necessarily through any fault of their own, like it was an intentional thing. They just, they had all this attention because they had this contact case. They're making money from it, they're getting attention, they want to keep that rolling, so they got to keep their story going somehow and keep it fresh. So, just because they fall victim to maybe these very typical human failings, it doesn't discount the fact that they were legitimate contactees. And when you analyze these cases, like Billy Meyer, like Stan Ronek, Billy Meyer, there's a really interesting optical physicist I met from Colombia, South America, and his name is, his avatar name is Rawls Ahi, and is actually, that's not his real name, but he's a professor at a university there, and he's analyzed the Billy Meyer photographs and films. And I was on the fence with that case for a long time. Wendell Stevens did a remarkable job talking about investigating that case with Jim Delatoso and some other folks involved, and I was very impressed by that case, and I thought, okay, Billy Meyer's probably had contact. But then I would read the bunker cases, and you start going, well, maybe he's a fraud. That looks like that was fake there, like the pictures of Sanjazi and Ascot, the Pleiadians, and you kind of go, well, I'm not sure about this. So I was on the fence for a long time, but when I saw Rawls' optical work, and there's something that's really compelling, one of the most interesting things is if there's one shot where the UFO is hovering by a tree, and people said, oh, that's a model tree, there was no tree there. But then other people said, no, there was a tree there, it was cut down. And you look at this video, and there's no way this is a model tree, because the tree is moving and bending in the wind, like a tree really moves and bends in the wind. And I built lots of models on a model train set. Model trees, this tall, won't do that. Like, there's no way that was a fake tree. So, and there's other things too, where he goes in and he analyzes the motions of these craft, and they couldn't possibly have been swung on a fishing line. Like, it's just physically impossible if you follow the motion of those craft. So when you get into the science of these things, the science validates most of the legitimate cases, and if they're not able to be validated, either there's not enough evidence, or the evidence that they have is just not high enough quality. So if it's a legitimate case and there's any evidence at all, then I think a large part of that these cases are actually true, and we need to go on that. Okay, provenance. That's another thing too. Like when you go on YouTube and you see all these videos of flying saucers and whatever, different vehicles, very little of them have any provenance. And so I'm always pushing people to get the witness name, to get the time and the date and the location, and to get as much provenance as you can. And this is where a lot of people will fail in their debunking attempts or trying to validate something, is there's no provenance at all. So that's very, very important to have provable provenance. And we'll talk about the other stuff a little bit further. Okay, a little bit about me, not to go on too much about me, but like I said, I've had this really incredible life. My dad worked for NASA. He was a spacesuit engineer, and he was friends with Neil and Buzz. In fact, he was going to be an astronaut, and my mom told him, well, if we move again, I'm going to divorce you. So we would have had to move from Houston, where he was at the Johnson Flight Center, to Florida to the astronaut training program, and so he ended up not doing it to keep the family together. They ended up getting divorced anyway. But so he would hang out with Neil and Buzz, and it's funny, he said Neil was a tight ass, which meant like Neil was a square. He was very straight, which I think when you see Neil talk and the archival stuff, you can tell that he's very much he was a military guy, and these guys are very much military people, and no disrespect to military people. I almost went to the Air Force Academy myself, and that they're programmed in a way to say, okay, yes sir, whatever you tell me, I'm going to accept that. And that's why I didn't go to the Air Force, because I got to have a reason, and I want to know why you're making a decision you're making, so that if some superior officer would tell me to do something, I'd go, well, wait a minute, why? They'd throw me in the brig in 5 minutes. So I decided wisely not to join the military. But at any rate, so Neil and Buzz, so my dad liked to have a few cocktails in that era, the 50s and 60s. People liked to go and have a few pops. So I was in I don't say Coral Gables, what is it? It's Cocoa Beach, right? So the guys would go, there was a bar down there, I forget the name of it, but so Buzz, that nickname is there for a reason, and it's not like he was a bee. And so my dad, when they would go have a beer or two, so they would talk about various things, under the cover of some alcohol, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that a little bit later. Okay, so because of that influence, I was going to Johnson Flight Center when I was 5 years old, playing with NASA hardware. I got to go on all the simulators. I had a backpack, a NASA backpack, and a space helmet, all this stuff, which, I wish I'd kept now, but, when you're a teenager and your parents get divorced and one moves here and another's 1,000 miles away and you're going back and forth, it was kind of hard to keep that stuff together, and I kick myself now for not having that hardware, but it was pretty cool. It's very cool. So anyway, and that made me want to be, I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy and fly the shuttle. But long story short, I didn't, and I got into tech in another way. And I started as a laser engineer when I worked for Hughes Aircraft. It was on a defense, it was on the cruise missile. Basically, I was working on a laser radar system for the cruise missile. And after working there for a while, I just felt like, I didn't want my work to be responsible for potentially killing, 1 million people. So I left that job and got just into, entertainment with working for Paramount and then making video games, the ad agency stuff, the internet, and so I was doing all this kind of stuff until 2002, where I had this incredible experience. In the book that I'm just about finished with writing, Inventing Magnet Blocks, My Cosmic Journey Through the International Toy Business, it talks about the experience from when I first started hearing this voice. I was at home, working from home that day, and it felt like somebody was standing behind me whispering in my ear. Now, we all have that voice inside our head that when you talk to yourself, let's say you're pissed off at the cat because it just, tore something up, and you kind of like smack the cat and run away, and you kind of tell yourself, darn it, I didn't mean to hit the cat, or whatever. Like that internal voice that you have, that sentence, right? This was not that voice. This felt like somebody standing right behind me. In fact, when I first heard it, I jumped and I got the prickles on the back of my neck because I thought someone was in the house with me. So it really was like a profound thing. And because I'm very scientific and because I was pre-med in college, I knew enough about healthcare and I wanted to be a neurologist, as the case may be. So I knew that, hearing a voice, that's what schizophrenics have. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh shit, I've got a brain tumor, I'm schizophrenic, what's going on? And I went through and I had MRIs done, and I went to talk to the doctors and everything, and then come to find out, like, if a voice in your head stops after 5 days, like mine did, it's not schizophrenia. Schizophrenia, the voice will keep talking to you. So it was not schizophrenia, and it described itself to me as literally, think of it like consciousness exists as a wave, as a field of energy, like a wave of energy. And we all are a part of this consciousness field. And there's different levels of beings, and there are angels potentially, what is the one true God, if there's even one God. But, there's like layers of an onion, so at some point, there's going to be entities and creatures, sentient creatures of existence that are beyond the dimensions that we can perceive. So this was that type of a being, and it was like a hive mind. It wasn't like a single individual ego with a name. It was like a colony, a colony consciousness, I could describe it as. And so when I was communicating with it, it was like someone talking to me, and it wasn't like it was an audible voice, but it wasn't my voice. And yet, at the same token, it never identified itself as having an ego, right? Like as having a central personality to it. And so it started giving me information. Like I said, there were mathematical formulas. Some of this is in the book. I would ask questions of it about the nature of reality, about God, about Jesus, about our history. And so I took notes over this period, and the results of some of the information I got was, one of them was this product I invented called Magnet Blocks, which is all based on sacred geometry. Here, I'll pass this around. This is based on sacred geometry, which is the geometry of the universe. And this is, it's fundamental to the way everything works. And it's really profound. There's stuff going on in this system that I'm still discovering things from. And beyond this product that came out of this, there's other pieces that have come out as well, like this 4D sound system I've invented called Tetraphonics. And I'll talk about this another time or after we can, if you want to know more about it. I'm going to do a presentation on all of my inventions and so forth at some point that describes all of the math and the sacred geometry behind it. So this is not the place for that right now, but needless to say, extremely profound. So this has been my life for the past, 18 years or so. I developed the toy, and then through force majeure and act of God, in 4 years I went from nothing to I made $250,000 in 2006, and by 2009 I was bankrupt. So things happen, and through no fault of my own either. It had nothing to do with anything I did. It was a competitor's product using similar magnet technology, and their product killed a 2-year-old child, and that company's failure and shitty business put me and a bunch of other companies out of business and cost me pretty much everything. So I've been recovering from that ever since. I'm also a musician, a composer, and a keyboard player. I've been trying to do this sort of not-for-profit thing called Terra Care, where when I go hike around, I go for walks in the parks and in the woods and stuff, and I take a plastic bag with me and always pick up trash, because I hate pollution, I hate litter, and it's nothing to just put a bag on your belt and you see a can of beer and you pick it up and you put it in your bag, and just a couple of pieces like that. So I try to encourage people to do stuff like that to keep the world beautiful, because we could have paradise here and we got to treat better care of it. Okay, so anyway, that's a touch about me. Now, this is specifically, oops, wait a second, let me try this one here. There we go. So yeah, it came from outer space, right? So what happened was I was working on my CD of instrumental music, this Astral Waves here, and when this happened, when I found out from an astrologer and an astronomer friend of mine, was in May of 2002, the planets like Jupiter and Saturn and Mercury, they were in a line that only happens about every 1,000 years. I've heard that from the voice, and then I kind of man, really, right? And then I looked into it and I found it was true. So that was the weird stuff like that happened. Let's see. We talked about all this already. So the work too. So what's interesting is, and I'm an advanced math person. I had graduate mathematics, and I was an honors math student. And I learned about Buckminster Fuller, who did the geodesic dome, and I was really into him in college. And what's fascinating is I never really knew anything about sacred geometry. I knew about linear algebra and Laplace transforms, differential equations, and all this different stuff, but yet we're, in geometry, analytical geometry, but never the sacred geometry aspect. And I think they should start kids with this, because it is so compelling. It's what nature's based on. It's beautiful and it's profound. And so it took this experience for me to really learn about this other field of math, which is just really beautiful. So what I'm working on right now, what Jennifer mentioned, spherology, is just a working title for it, but I'm basically, it's all balls. And what I mean is that what I'm doing is I'm putting together spheres, and there's a lot of really, really unbelievable math that's coming out of this. I mean, prime number sequences. When prime numbers come out of something as simple as just a bunch of balls, that's mind-blowing into itself. So there's really, that's what's really, really exciting about this work. So I'm trying to find a way to get funding to develop this further, because there's something extremely special here. At any rate, so that came from, even though I had this work, I learned about Buckminster Fuller, and much later Roger Penrose, who's a really wonderful British mathematician, and their work, that a lot of this stuff, it's I'm not the first one to get this information. It's been around for a long time, but it's one of these truths that are covered up in society. People should be learning this in school, and people would be going, wow, and being excited about this stuff. And instead, they go, let's learn how to balance a checkbook. It's all about money. Let's make it about money. Everything's money. It's no, we're going down the wrong avenue if we think like this. We've got to go back into the arts and get people to think creatively. Super important. All right. So again, based on things have to be based on evidence, right? So this is me at the what's it called? Not Kennedy Space Center, Canaveral, right?
Goddard.
So Goddard, whatever. It's the one in Florida. And,
Cape Canaveral.
Right, and I took my mom there, and just spent some time with her. And what was really interesting is when I was there, I got to run into Well, let's see. We're going to come back to who I ran into in just a second. Okay, so anyway, that's me in Florida. This is my dad. So you can see here, I don't know if you can read this, but James P. Fentress. So this is my dad and me and my sister. That's my dad and I in Hawaii when he got married again. It's my dad with my son. So, this is evidence. This is proof that I'm not just telling you guys a story. This is my dad. That's his name. That's my name. So a lot of people make claims. It's important to back up what you're talking about. Now, when I was in Florida, what he's saying is, Houston, we still have the alien spacecraft under observance, okay? That's John Blaha, commander of the space shuttle, whom I met, and I asked him about this. What happened was, back before they were encrypting radio communications, when they would talk to the shuttle via the public line, right, and that's what like CBS would be tuned into, well, when they needed to talk about something secret, they would switch to what's called the sideband, or the medical channel. Because nobody knew about that channel, so they figured, hey, it's safe, we can talk about secret stuff on this. Well, clever engineers, one guy, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but he had a dish on his house, and he pointed it at the space shuttle, and he got that recording. Now, what's interesting is people have tried to debunk that recording, and they say, that's not John Blaha. Well, I beg to differ. I met the man, and that's his voice. So he's saying, Houston, we have the alien spacecraft under observance. Now, I asked him about that. What happened was he gave a talk. What happened, after they're an astronaut, they got to do their PR stint at Cape Canaveral and talk to the public. So I had his book, and I was getting it signed for my dad. So I went and said, hey, hi, John, my dad worked for NASA, the spacesuit, blah, blah, blah. Would you sign the book for him? She said, sure. And then, so I'm talking to him just for a second. He goes, well, excuse me, I need to use the restroom. And I said, don't mind me, I'm going to follow you, but I need to use the restroom too, which was true. And I wasn't even really thinking about asking him this question, but anyway, so we go to the men's room, and I didn't want to be right on top of him, so he's in a urinal here, and I gave him room, right? So I'm at like a urinal over, and he's kind of trying to mind my own business. So he's finished, and so I said, hey, John, I'm just curious, was that your voice on that tape? And like he knew exactly what I was asking. And he gave me one of these looks, like, it's like, and he looked at me with the expression of, now I can't answer that question. Right? And he didn't say that, but that's the look he gave me. He was a little bit annoyed, like, not again, but like, I can't. And he said something to the effect of like, to that, like, I can't tell you, but he said something, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was, but it was like, well, even if it was true, I couldn't say anything about it. Now, that's what's known as a non-denial denial, and I've been getting a lot of those lately, okay? So this is typically, if you think about it, if something didn't happen, what's to stop them from just saying, yeah, no, that's not me, I was not, wasn't there, I didn't, was not behind the curtain, not me. But these guys, none of them will deny it flat out, because I don't think they want to know. They want to tell us the truth, but the national security oath prevents you from saying anything. In fact, my dad, like, I had a secret clearance when I worked at Hughes. They do a very extensive background check. They go back to your elementary school. They talk to the teachers and neighbors, and they make sure that you're a legitimate American and that you don't have any crazy stuff in your background. So they're very serious about this, and the penalties are pretty stiff. So I had a secret clearance. My dad had a secret clearance, and my dad would never tell me anything. Because it's about, really for him, there's jail associated with breaking your security oath, but it's really the money. It's that, they take your pension away if that happens. And my dad was like, no, I don't want to have him take my pension away because that would impact, ultimately, like, whatever inheritance he would have from me. And so he'd never say anything to me until he got cancer. They gave him 2 months to live, and he actually lived for 14 months. But so it was really towards the end, and I asked him, is there anything that you can tell me that, since I know you're going to be passing away soon, and, it's a really horrific time, and I asked him if anything he could tell me. And so, indeed, when he was talking with Buzz, that Buzz told them that when they were in the command module with Mike Collins and Neil, before they got into the LEM, the Lunar Excursion Module, before they went down to the surface, and they went down the dark side of the moon, he said the back side of the moon, it was like flying over Manhattan at night. So there's lit structures on the dark side of the moon that are bright enough that, like, it's a city. So there's a lot of activity going on over there. All right, and then there's also the story about how they saw like craft on the rim of where the Mare Tranquillus, and where they said that there was, and he didn't say that specifically to my dad, but he said that, well, we're not the only ones up there. So, take that for what it's worth. It's hearsay, all right? But John Blaha, let me tell you, this is his voice, and try and hear it again. That's a computer voice saying what he says. All right, so he's saying, here's the Discovery spacecraft. We still have the alien. This is the Discovery. We still have the alien spacecraft under VFR, which is Visual Flight Rules. In other words, they can see it. All right, so now what's interesting this year, what's been happening? Okay, so TTSA, the To the Stars Academy. So these guys have been making some big news, and it's, I have a lot of suspicion about this organization because if you look at who's involved with it, but it came from the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. So, it's government, it's intelligence, and it's questionable. Tom DeLonge, love him or hate him. Let's see what they do. They're trying to make some forward progress, so I have to give them kudos for trying to push the ball forward, provided it's not all disinformation. Now, what's interesting is that the Navy has confirmed, now we already knew that it was from the Navy with this David Fravor talking about the Tic Tac and everything, like we already knew that was a real thing, but the Navy did then come out and say, yeah, that was a UFO, like we don't know what that was. That's disclosure. So we've had disclosure. We actually had disclosure in 47. The Army said, yep, flying saucer landed, we got it, and then they retracted it. And this is what they do. So some paranoid schizophrenic that works for the Pentagon says, we can't tell the public about aliens. Fear, control. And so they covered it up. The same thing, there was a program called the National Aerospace Plane that my dad worked on. And this was a public program for 2 years. And then it's gone. Like, what happened to it? Well, it became a black program. And I believe that's become what's known as the Aurora. It's a hyperjet, scramjet type of technology, hypersonic vehicle. All right, anyway, so we've had disclosure, great, but it's still little bits are coming out. And the Navy confirms that, and then we get this Wilson memo. Who's heard of the Wilson memo leak? No? Okay. So this is a really big deal in ufology. Everybody, Richard Dolan and Grant Cameron and Linda Moulton Howe and all the usual suspects have been drilling into this thing. And so I'm looking at their analysis, and I'm going through it, and I'm going, all right, let me test how legitimate their research is. Let me see what's really going on with this. Maybe Richard Dolan and Linda, who I like both of those people a lot, and I think they have a lot of legitimate information, but what if they're disinformers? How would we know? Right? A lot of people thought Stan Friedman maybe was lying about stuff, and different people. You get a lot of condemnation. There's these schisms in ufology where people are taking different sides of the argument. So I thought, well, let me just pretend like I'm the researcher, and let me see what I can find out. So I look at To the Stars Academy, and I look at the players here because of their relationship with the Navy and the Tic Tac footage. And just to get a context of the playing field here. And you look at these guys, so, this guy here, Defense Central Intelligence Agency, Morningside, Lockheed Martin, Hal Potoff has a lot of CIA stuff with mind control, with the remote viewing, with all kinds of stuff. All right, so you look at these guys here, National Security Advisor. They're very well tied in with intelligence agencies. And for me, I'm very suspicious about intelligence agencies because you look at the CIA and what they've been doing in the name of God knows what, with our money, creating coups and starting wars and doing a lot of nasty, pardon my French, a lot of nasty shit. And so I'm not a fan of intelligence agencies. I understand an alleged need for them in time of war, but we don't have war. We don't need to make any more war, and we don't need any intelligence agencies. I'm sorry. Let's get rid of them all. So, in regards to the Tic Tac thing, though, I came across this article, and it talks about Lou Elizondo and his claims, and they say, did he actually work for the Pentagon? So here's an article about him, and they do this background work on him, and they say, like, well, did he actually work for the Pentagon? And I don't know how you really know, because if they want to cover it up, they cover it up. For example, Bob Lazar. The guy clearly has more evidence than just about any other insider in terms of being able to prove that he worked on the program, the S4 reverse engineering program. He had his ID, his pay stub from the Naval Intelligence. I mean, how much more information can you get? How much evidence can you get? So I haven't seen anything about Elizondo except just what he said. So talk is cheap. Let's see, the documents. But at any rate, here's one document here, and this is a FOIA request talking about ATIP, right? Now, in my high school reunion, like I said on Friday, I met a fellow I used to go to school with who works for the DIA. And he said, if you're really interested, he dealt with FOIA requests. And he said, send us a letter and put in a FOIA request, because they're bound by law for 25 years. Anything over 25 years, they have to release. So you can get information from them. And he said, I'd read that, well, you need to know the specific document number or the name of the document or the specific people involved. And he said, no, you really don't. Just put as much information as you can and what you think you might be looking for, and they'll try to get you information. So that was encouraging. And now I got a contact there, so maybe that will, maybe I can get more info.
Basically, this document says they have to withhold the information from you. They can't give it to you, right?
And this
Second
one here,
paragraph, I've determined that some portion of the document must be withheld.
right, well, that's, portions of, that's when they're blacked out, right? So the redacted part, that always kills me, the redacted parts, right? So I like this. If you're not satisfied with my response, right, it's like, never be satisfied. Don't, just keep pushing. That's what you've got to do for that thing. But yeah, in this particular case, on that particular example, yeah, that's right. So, and of course, if it's a hot button item, they definitely will push back harder. It's like an insurance claim. You get in a car accident, you want your money, and the insurance company goes, oh, gee, oops, your policy's not up to date. Or they do everything they can to stall and delay. So. It's the government. Of course, they're not going to be easy to work with, but he said keep going, that they will come clean, which is good. All right, here's another example of what's available when you just do a little bit of digging. And this congressman says, hey, they're withholding information. So here's one guy in Washington who's actually trying to fight to get more disclosure. So even in Washington, although it's a small segment of people that are pushing for disclosure, there are good people in Washington, and there are people who are trying to get more information out. So Mark Walker of North Carolina here, and he's on the Intelligence and Counterterrorism Subcommittee, and he's asking for more information about from the Navy. Now, I don't know if you all have seen this photograph, but that's a Navy photograph. So this was from a submarine periscope camera from the 50s, I think 51 or 52. And, is that one of ours or one of theirs?
That was from 1971, the USS Trepang in the Arctic Sea.
Ah, right. I think one of them was 52, right?
I think this one is, and that one might be.
Right.
They're two different photos, from what I remember.
Absolutely, yeah, that's right. And so, what's interesting about this, so the lore is that, if you believe that we were able to, from T. Townsend Brown and Victor Schauberger and the Nazis operating paperclip, and yeah, we had artificial gravity, and we took submarines and we put them into space, and that became Solar Warden, or whatever the storyline is. I see Bambi's wrinkling her. Have you heard this one? No? Okay, well, so one of the themes running through ufology is that back in the 20s, the Germans, the Thule Society and the Vril Society, these were metaphysical societies, and they had contact with extraterrestrials, and then people like Victor Schauberger and others developed artificial gravity, and they were able to have levitating vehicles. That through Operation Paperclip after World War II, we brought these German scientists to the United States, also the Russians got some of them, and we created artificial gravity vehicles. And back when I was a kid, in the 60s, the Jetsons, I remember we were promised, by the time I'm almost 60, so we were promised by now we would have flying cars, and it was not a big deal. Like, where did they go, right? So they're covering it up again. And so if we had this technology, so one of the stories, like Corey Good talks about this secret space program, and Gary McKinnon, the solar warden program that he found out about. Okay, the idea is that a submarine is a lot like a spaceship. It's got to be airtight. There's no control surfaces really needed. If you put an artificial gravity propulsion device in that, you could turn a submarine into a spaceship very easily. Well, not easily, you could do it in theory. So I look at something like this, and I think, well, even if we had that technology and we had solved it back in the 40s, I think Greer or somebody believes it was in the 40s or 50s, I think we solved artificial gravity. Even if that's true, I find it hard to believe that, you get something that looks like a Zeppelin, but that thing looks huge. That looks like it's big as an aircraft carrier. It's hard to tell distance in a scenario like this because you have nothing really to reference it against. And it would be nice if whoever leaked this photograph, if there was a reticle on there so we could see the size of this thing. But it looks pretty big, and I suspect that that's not one of ours, but I suppose in theory it's possible. But the point is the Navy's been involved with this for a long time. Some of the first sightings were USOs, and it makes a lot of sense for the Navy to be in charge of any space activity because the way they run their aircraft carriers and their armadas, their fleets, with various aircraft carriers, destroyers, and support craft, right? You've got this whole armada on the ocean. Well, that's how you would do it in space as well. You wouldn't have just one rocket ship or something. So it kind of makes sense that the Navy would want to be involved in the management of a space program. Okay, here's just more documentation showing that yes, the Navy has reported that these are actually an authentic series of UFOs. Okay, so, and that's, it's pretty cool that the Navy's come forward first. So you gotta wonder though, is that gonna put the Space Force at odds with the Navy, right? So if the Navy's really involved with the space activity and Trump's now started the Space Force, I'm curious how that's gonna shake out in the future. Okay, so now let's get into the Wilson leak memos. So Stephen Greer, of course, the Disclosure Project, he briefed Congress in 2001, and he was always talking about that he briefed presidents about the UFO reality and that he's got a lot of very detailed information that he still hasn't shared. He's got a dead man trigger, so if anything happens to him, like this information will be released. Anyway, in his discussions, he talked about various meetings with some of these senior intelligence and Pentagon officials. Now, these memos that they came out, I guess, a couple years ago, but they came from Edgar Mitchell's estate. So when he passed away, Grant Cameron got them, and then Grant shared them with Richard and Linda, and other people got it after that. So we can trace the provenance of the file to Edgar Mitchell's estate, okay? So we know it came out of there. Now, I wish I would have met Edgar. You read about his background, what a brilliant guy, and what a humanitarian, I would have loved to have met him. But he had a lot of integrity, and if you saw anything, in fact, I was talking with someone recently who, what did he say? So he knew Edgar, and he'd worked with him, and he asked them about the moon landing, and he said, well, what happened when you landed on the moon? And Edgar says, you know what we found when we got up there? When I looked up, a lot of rocks, right? But then afterwards, and the guy I was talking to he didn't tell me any detail beyond that, but he alluded to the fact that afterwards that Edgar was candid and opened up some more information. So I'm going to try and get a hold of that information, but these are, when people are letting cats out of the bag like this, it's kind of like fishing, and you got to be very careful how you get the information out. Because there's a lot at stake. I mean, if I've got a pension on the line, I don't want to risk that. I totally understand that. So, all right.
Can you take a quick question?
Sure.
Edgar Mitchell, how close did he grow up to Roswell, and how old was he when that happened?
I think he was 11.
Yeah, that's what I recall too.
He
So
was
he was a
nearby.
young kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was born. Was he born
He
in
was
Roswell?
born-
Yeah,
he was born and
lived-
grew
he
up in
grew
Roswell.
up there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. Yeah. So Eric, when I looked at the analysis of the Wilson leak memos by Richard Dolan and by Grant, and they believe that they're true. Okay. So it's all right. Well, that's great. Belief is only good for what your belief is. It doesn't prove anything. So the problem with these is that there's no confirmed provenance beyond Edgar Mitchell. And then there's this website, the Black Vault, that debunks a lot of UFO stuff, and they believe that they're false. So I looked at the landscape of this, and I said, all right, well, let me try and find out what's actually happening. So let me see, how far I can go to researching it. Now, before we get started into the memos, there's just a couple of abbreviations we're going to see. So in the memo is a transcription by Dr. Eric Davis, who met with Admiral Wilson. Admiral Wilson was called the J2. He was the second in charge of the Pentagon for involved with running, the funding of all of the defense. And so this, what is called a SAP, or Special Access Program, these programs they're black, so there's no detail about them. And even though it was Wilson's responsibility to have oversight on these projects, our government's become so perverted that that he didn't even have access to these projects. There's something called the SES, the Senior Executive Service, which is they're non-voting positions. They're what do they call it? Where they're you're given the job, and they're in government. They're very highly paid. These people have a lot of power, but they're unelected, and they hold their position for decades, and they wield enormous influence over the government, and they work with the lobbyists, and so there's a lot of corruption in the SES, and I believe that they've somehow taken the purview, as Robert Mueller would say. They would take that authority. They took it away from the government. I mean, Ike warned us about that too when he left office in his famous speech about the undue influence of the military-industrial complex. So we knew this was coming, and we could see that the power was being taken away from the people and being put into the hands of very few. And that's the danger we're in now. That's what we're seeing the effects of now. So it's not a good thing. But at any rate, within the memo, so you're going to hear reference to, there's a JA, we believe is John Alexander, and he wrote this book. And he was an Army colonel who worked in intelligence. BDM, this is an aerospace contracting firm, Braddock Dunn McDonald, now owned by Northrop. Bloom is Howard Bloom, who is another author. AFIO, Association of Former Intelligence Officers. PACAF, Pacific Air Forces, and the SES Senior Executive Service. So we'll see these here. Now the memos, so this is a cover letter that came with these memos. This is to Eric Davis by Will Miller. Now, I called Will, I looked him up, and I found his phone number, and I spoke to him. And he was the first denial I got, right? When I talked to him, and he's a very nice gentleman. He's retired in Florida. He was a ufologist for 30 years, but he's no longer involved. He doesn't like where ufology is right now with the schisms in the field between various researchers and a lot of kind of information that seems peripheral in his mind to it. Some of it borders on very new agey spirituality stuff, which he wasn't really into, and he's more of a nuts and bolts guy. So at any rate, I asked him about this letter, and so first thing he said is, he says, "No, I don't remember writing that letter." Okay. Now I asked him, did you write this letter? He goes, no, I don't remember writing that letter. All right. And so then he says, but it looks like something I would have written. Right? Now, right there, you kind of go, all right, so if he didn't write it, he would have just said, I didn't write it. So why would he say it looks like something I would have written, right? So right there, a warning flag's got to go off, like, all right, something is lurking beneath the surface here. And so, I pushed him a bit on this. Now, this gentleman here, Mr. Beckwith, unfortunately, he passed away. I tried calling him, and I spoke to one of his coworkers. And so he was an electrical engineer who has a new model had a new model of the universe called the force model of the universe. And so his colleague actually sent me that paper, and it's more of an electric universe theory. When I'm going through that right now, it's fairly technical. But at any rate, so Will also said that he doesn't have a copy of this letter, right? He doesn't have an actual copy of the letter. And then he said again that, he said, yeah, whoever wrote this knew me really well, knows me really well. Okay. Now, so again, if it was pure hokum, I would think he would have said, I didn't write it, end of story. And he's one of these guys where I think, now that he's retired and he says he's working on 3 books right now that he wants to do. So he's in a different phase of his life, and I think that it's like with all of these guys, when I talk to them, they can't admit it because of the governmental authority and the national security oath and so forth, that they can't really talk about it, but they keep their toe in it because when everything breaks, they can then come forward and say, yeah, I was there and I'll corroborate it. That's what I'm inferring. Let me see, that's back here. So this just talks about, this is this cover letter. He's talking so Will's contacted Eric Davis. Now, Eric Davis works with Hall Puthoff, they did at NIDS, the National Institute of Discovery Science, which is Robert Bigelow and his firm, and they funded NIDS. And these are scientists, and they were working on the Skinwalker Ranch. They were there for a long time doing analysis of that place. And they've been involved with a whole bunch of other stuff. And when I talked, next after I talked to Will, I said, well, I got to talk to Eric. So I emailed Eric Davis. Here you go. Here's Bill Miller, and here you go. I couldn't get a hold of Wilson. Okay, now here's the memo. This is the meeting that Eric Davis had with Admiral Wilson. So what happened was, and I think Greer too had something to do with this, that when Wilson was aware that there are these secret programs going on, that millions, if not billions of dollars are spent, and they don't know what it's for. So Wilson was basically trying to do his job, which was find out where the money's going for, because it's ultimately, he's responsible for the audit trail of this material. So Davis gets a hold of Wilson, and it took quite some time to arrange the meeting, according to the information, and finally Wilson agrees to meet with him to have a clandestine meeting so that Davis can share with Wilson what he knows about the secret aspect, the non-oversight SAPs that are happening, the unacknowledged special access programs. Okay, so when we go through and look at this memo, you can download this off the internet. It's in the presentation. I can make it available to you if you want, but these are all the pages to this. And so if you go through this, now it says go to the EGG, that's a German group, or I forget what the acronym is. It's like Ehrlichman, Gesundhof, and Gesellschaft, so I can't remember the German names for it. You can look it up. They're now a company called URS. They were sold, so it's been acquired. But that's where Bob Lazar initially got associated with the reverse engineering out at S4. So Davis meets with him at this place, and they talk about, they're sitting in his car in the back of the building. Now that parking area is secure, so they felt that was a safe place that they could meet, where no one could be really eavesdropping on them, yet they're in a safe area, so they could kind of talk off book a bit. And so they go through here, and Wilson is saying the reason why he's giving Eric Davis this audience is because Eric Davis had a pedigree. He had a provenance. He was recommended, former the intelligence work and so forth. So, and he talks about this and how he figured out who Eric Davis was, and this guy Oak Shannon, who was well respected, former defense guy. And so these relationships taught. Now, what I learned when I was working on a secret program is that there's secret information and then there's secret information. And there's different levels. We'll talk about this further. But a lot of these guys, even though you have a national security oath and you can go to jail for talking about things, and even though you're not supposed to talk to anybody about this, there's a club within a club. And if you're talking with someone who's a part of that club, people share secret information. They do break their oaths, and people do share information with their spouses and their children sometimes. So, the information, people say, oh, no one can keep a secret. And yeah, to some extent that's true, but secrets are kept for many, many years. And the more intense the secret, the longer they'll keep it. All right, so anyway, they talk about this meeting here. This is Stephen Greer being mentioned here, Edgar Mitchell. So they're talking about all of this stuff. And then here I highlighted some things. He doesn't trust J.A., a liar. That's the author, John Alexander. Then he talked about this guy Bloom's book here. And then he briefed me on the whole BDM thing. That was another one of the DoD contractors. So RV for the reverse engineering reproduction vehicle here. And so because Oak Shannon said that Eric Davis was a team player, Wilson agreed to meet with him. So this is where the club is bypassing the secrecy oaths that they took, and he's going to talk with them because Wilson wants the information. Wilson wants to know what's really going on because he's not read into the program. Right? He's just really trying to do his job. Okay, so going through this a little bit further. Let's see. He talks about here what, again, the provenance of some of these people are. And if you go through this, I couldn't figure out who Rich and Doug were, but I looked up these acronyms here and figured out what this was. And you can see how this is how he's vetting Davis and understanding the relationship between the science and reverse engineering with these secret programs. Okay, anyway, so you go through the memo here, and it's interesting reading. What's fascinating is Eric Davis apparently wrote this in his car after the meeting from memory. So he has the meeting all verbally with Edwin Wilson, and then he immediately begins transcribing notes so that he has them. That's allegedly where this comes from. And they talk about really the reality of how these corporate entities like Lockheed and Northrop Grumman get these billions of dollars in black money to fund reverse engineering and God knows what else related to the extraterrestrial technology. And Wilson, who's supposed to be responsible for this, is trying to bring that responsibility back under the government, under an honest guy in government who's trying to do the right thing. And so all of this information that Davis is giving him, basically, as you read through this, you can find out that Davis knows stuff that Wilson doesn't. And Wilson is appreciative that he's getting the filling in some of the blanks that gives him enough information to then dig further. So what happened was Wilson digs further, and he sets up a meeting with the contractor who, through some of his own investigation, they find out, and he wouldn't say who it is, I believe it's probably Lockheed, but it might be Northrop Grumman, but they find that this group that's running one of these black special access programs, and they won't tell Wilson what they're doing. They're saying you're not authorized, and yet it's his job, it's his responsibility. He is appointed by the president to do this job, and these guys, there was a lawyer and a project manager, and they won't tell. So they talk about, it's really interesting to talk about some of the money here too, how The money is like 6 to 7 times over what is budgeted. So they're spending, God knows, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And then they talk about, well, what, for example, what special access program compartment did you find? Core secret, they won't say. What's the code name? Core secret, won't say. Who is the contractor? Won't say. And so he can't get any of this information. Wilson's like thwarted at finding out what it is. And then what happened when you found the contractor? Okay, so they confirm that, okay, yeah, we're doing some black work here. And yeah, we're doing some. So then he meets with, let's see, where is this? He talked to, there were there were program managers, and there was an attorney. Let's see. I forget where this is. Yeah, there are these 3 people that they talked to, and there was a name, the Watch Committee. They call themselves the Watch Committee, or the Gatekeepers. And he said that they were almost outed, like about 10 years before, they were almost outed due to some auditing that was happening, but they kind of kept it hidden. Yeah, here you go. Years ago, in an audit investigation, it led to them, it wasn't supposed to, they were nearly outed. And then a battle, a nasty back and forth between them, the investigator and the Pentagon chief ensued. Like a tug of war for program transparency, they told me money was the issue. Their hiding out became the other issue. So these guys don't want to give up those big budgets they've got. All common sense human behavior, really. It's not unexpected. All right, so anyway, going through all of this, it pretty much, again, you can look at the detail of this, but there's nothing really amazing here other than the fact that, yes, they're reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. Okay, it's been captured. One of them, they talk about it being found in an archaeological dig, which sort of confirms one of the Socorro, I believe, is where it was a team of archaeologists found a buried saucer. So they confirm that. They confirm in here, let's see. Over here, this is really interesting. Okay, so they were talking about a craft that they believe could fly in air, space, and water, different dimensions. It could not have come from this earth. It was not made by human hands. He asked about Roswell, about the Holloman landing, about Majestic 12, and some other famous cases, Ronnie Zamora and Bentwaters, RAF. All right, so let's see, where is it? Right here, so they told me they were to immediately drop the matter and let it go. They're telling Wilson, don't dig any deeper, you can't. And he says they, not sure who the they were. Was that they, the people at the contractors, at the aerospace contracting, the defense company firm, or was that, the president or somebody saying not to dig deeper? So I'm not sure about that. And they were very angry. So the people at the aerospace firm, they got very angry, and also people in the Pentagon. So this senior review group said that if you talk about this, you don't get a promotion, you get out, you get thrown out of your job and stuff. So most of the secrecy is about, again, it's money. Everything comes down to money. Where else here? Details. Let's see. This is interesting. One of the people he talked to, Gansler, who I haven't found him yet. He said that UFOs are real, but alien abductions are not real. Now, I don't believe that. This is where, that's information that all of the wealth of information about abductions goes against that. And so in here they kind of allude to like what some people said, even like Greer doesn't believe that they're real, that they're faked by the military. But honestly, I know a lot of people in the military, and the U.S. government is not running around with, dwarfs in alien costumes to do mind control on the public, to pretend like they're being abducted by aliens. I just don't believe that fundamentally. I think that's disinformation in my view. And I think that the reason there are disinformations about that is because if you think about it, if alien abductions are actually happening, then, you know, we're not safe. That's their thinking. We're not, you know, they're running around being able to abduct people. They're not going to be too happy. If the public knew that was going on, like for legitimately knew, I think they would be kind of pissed off about that. Like, hey, government, aren't you supposed to be protecting us? So I think that's where that comes from. All right, then they talk a bit more just about, you know, not saying anything about this, keep it quiet, that there might be some deathbed confessions come along. They talked about just some other stuff closing off the memo here. Now, I emailed Eric Davis because I couldn't get him on the phone. So this is what he says, right? So thanks for writing. I'm no longer funded to do research and he's looking for a job. He said, Bob Lazar is a proven pathological liar, twice convicted, blah, blah, blah. He said, how to understand how or why George Knapp got fooled into thinking otherwise. I have no comment on the Wilson notes because their release had nothing to do with me or my employer, and they might contain classified information that I cannot comment on, if true. That's another non-denial denial, right? Now, for him to deny Bob Lazar, I'm a pretty skeptical person, and I have a fairly high bullshit detector. I think, you know, I've got a good sense of discernment. So when Bob Lazar could prove, and they have on videotape and eyewitnesses, that he knew where the test flights were happening, and they have that on videotape. So he knew about that. He knew about a very specialized hand sensor that very few people would know about. In fact, a friend of my dad's who works at Area 51, or worked at Area 51 until recently, he verified that, yeah, that hand scanner, they use those at Area 51. And Bob Lazar knew about that before anybody else, you know, would confirm it. He talked about Los Alamos, and one of his colleagues at Los Alamos, Robert Krangle, came forward and said, yeah, Bob was a physicist there. You've got his pay stub from Naval Intelligence, you've got his ID card from S4. I mean, he's got more evidence than most people, but most impressively is how the hell did he know that element 115 even existed 30 years before it came out of Los Alamos, right? I mean, there's no way that guy is not legitimate to some extent. Now, has he been paid to disinform the public? Okay, well, it's possible. Yeah, it could be. He could be spreading some disinformation. But if you really listen to his story, and there's a good documentary that came out last year about Bob, I believe him. I just get the sense that he's telling the truth because his story fits all of the data. Everything fits. I mean, you know, you can try to say, oh, well, he got arrested because he did some IT work for a whorehouse. Well, he needed work. He lost a job at S4. He needs to make money. So he got a contract doing putting in a software system in a local business. And prostitution is legal in Las Vegas, so what's the problem? Like, why does that make you, your story illegitimate? You know, I don't think he knew he was doing anything wrong when he did it, but to me, that can be a human failing. It's like, well, if the guy was a drug addict or something, like, okay, maybe he has that human failing, but it doesn't discount the fact that he may be still telling the truth. So if the story fits, then, and it fits the data, then you have to use some common sense here as well. Okay, another thing about Eric Davis. So he's trying to smear Bob Lazar, which right away, and when I wrote him back a response to this, which he hasn't replied to, and I pointed out these things about Bob Lazar, like, well, how do you account for the element 115? How do you account for the sighting that he knew about in advance? How do you account for the ID card, for the pay stub, for the yada yada yada? So I give him this list of things of why I believe Bob Lazar, which he never replied to, and then also he said, I have no comment on the alleged Wilson notes because their release had nothing to do with me or my employer. Well, the whole memo has to do with Eric Davis. Every other line is Eric Davis. So for him to say that the memo had nothing to do with him is very disingenuous. It had everything to do with him. Whether or not, is it real or not, that's the question. He never says it's not real. He never says that he didn't do it. He just says, I have no comment on it. So, again, I believe this is another non-denial denial. That's the way I read into that. Okay, so if you take it at face value, these guys say, no, it's not true, and this thing it's just a hoax. Well, what's the win? You know, I mean, why would someone waste their time writing this up? Okay, it's disinformation to muddy the waters more. So it's either disinformation or it isn't. Now, if it's disinformation, the way it works is that in disinformation you mix like some percent, 20%, let's say, real information with 80% false information, and you mix it up. And what's the reason for doing this? They're hiding something, okay?
Well, it makes us all sound crazy when we, it makes us all sound crazy.
Yeah, like, that's a good point. It's like the flat earth, that's gotten mixed in with conspiracy theories, and they're trying to say, well, if you believe in a conspiracy theory, you believe in a flat earth, and then you're crazy. Well, it's like, no, there's conspiracies, and there's some that are theoretical conspiracies, but then you look at actual conspiracies like 9/11, that's a real conspiracy. It's not a theory, it's a real conspiracy. You look at, the flat earth is a psyop. I mean, if you look at the explanations for the flat earth, it's like, that was genius, whoever came up with that, because it's the biggest bunch of nonsense that there is. Every celestial object in the universe is a spheroid. So the Earth's the only flat one, and what's on the other side? How come no one's ever seen it? I mean, there's the logical fallacies to the flat Earth abound, and yet people still try to promote that idea. And I just think, okay, they're the ones that are doing everybody a disservice, right? But it may be in that same context that because some of us can see through the real bullshit, stuff like the flat Earth, and then you have stuff like this, which could be a mix of true and false information. We have to go through and see where things line up and how we can statistically collaborate. Yeah.
Sir, I had a radio show for about 5 years on Z-Talk Radio, and I was interviewing Stan Freeman and Kathleen Morgan off and on for 5 years. And the last show I taped was almost 3 hours. And Stanton, vehemently told me over and over, and you folks can download this, it's conspiracy. The more questions you ask, it's a conspiracy. You can ask this question, but you're always going to come up with a conspiracy.
What's the conspiracy? Alien visitation or what?
Anything having to do with alien intelligence. And as he told me in the interview itself, the more questions you ask, the more you're going to get a lot of the BS. And the one thing he warned me on the show, basically, if you go full blown and go public and print this stuff and do all this, the government will sequester you down, and the conspiracy is they can pollute your Social Security, they can pollute your bank accounts. He pointed out to me before his death, and I was going to interview him 3 days before he had died, that as we open this quagmire, we're opening up an entire intelligence community.
Yeah.
That's your pointing out.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, I've actually talked to Stan before he passed away a number of times. He was a nice gentleman. I never could understand, though, he was really against Bob Lazar, and I always found that interesting because, again, from my point of view, when I look at the data and the evidence, it's pretty overwhelming. So Stan, I think, in that regard was wrong. I think that was his academic ego getting the best of him. Because he was a very brilliant guy, but he did believe a lot in the degree pedigree. And I've worked with a lot of PhDs, and I'm less impressed with the degree pedigree than Stan is. But and I think Bob was telling the truth. But aside from that, the thing about the conspiracy thing, we're at a really interesting time because if it's not for people like Julian Assange and to some extent Edward Snowden, and I'm a little guy. I don't have any smoking gun information to show anybody really that makes any big case, and I'm just looking at the data that's out there and trying to make some sense of it. And clearly, it's not so much, let's say, the CIA by itself, but it's a lot of people who've been co-opted by, let's say, the Mossad, Epstein, Rothschild cabal, or whoever it is. Like, these people are really evil, perverted bastards. I tell you, 3-4 years ago when I looked at Pizzagate, I was talking to people about that, and no one wanted to believe it. And they said, no, it can't be real, People don't think like that. They don't act like that. But no, they do. There's a lot of really evil people in the world, and they co-opt people in positions of power and authority. And when I worked at Sony, I had a guy offer me a $50,000 bribe because of the role I had there. And I had some sway, and he wanted to, have me under his thumb. And when I didn't take that bribe, I got fired. So, there's a lot of... But there's a lot of push to corrupt people in the world. And if we all don't stand up for what's true and what's right, then we're fucked. I mean, this planet, this species, we're so beyond fucked. If we don't turn it around now, we have to turn it around now. And so as much as I talk to my friends of mine who hate Trump, right? And I think, I hated the guy at first too, because he's a vain braggart, and he's a misogynist, and there's a lot you can say about his character that you can dislike. But I'll be damned, man, the guy is going after people in the swamp. Now, the results aren't as compelling as we'd like just yet, but, I'm hopeful that if things keep going, maybe we'll get some of these really evil people out of these positions of power. And we better hope he's successful, and all of us got to support this effort, and it's not about right and left, Democrat, Republican, it's about right and wrong. And then these people that are co-opting our money, they're taking our tax money, they're starting illegal wars. These are people who are doing really evil shit, and we got to call on them. And it's going to cost some of us our lives, no doubt. There's in a war, people get killed, and this is a war between good and evil, my friend. I mean, it's a scary time. So, Stan was right about that. It's a real conspiracy, and it goes deep. But damn, we better all try and bond together to fight it.
When you say evil people, are you of the belief, as I am, that these people at the top are actually doing deals with the devil or with evil jinn, and that, like, for example, war would be the blood sacrifice, that's the return payment, and they get the power and control by doing these deals with the devil? Is that what we're talking about?
I don't know how it really works at that level. I'll say this, that there's definitely evil in the world, whether it's Satan and that whole structure of, there's the relationship between, the one God and Satan as the equal to God, who then, but not equal. It's like, and the way that structure is, and then, I don't really know how that fits. That's beyond my pay grade. I think the people that are doing evil, I think that this it goes back thousands of years to some kind of, whether it's a religious or a pagan type of ritual sacrifice, that it's a combination of those forces along with just human greed and the desire for control over others. It's like a lust, a kind of it's something that I don't relate to at all. So it's hard for me really to understand that kind of thinking, but I can certainly see the results of it. And, when I first started going down the pedophile rabbit hole, and I've got an 8-year-old son, and let me tell you, I mean, this made me super, super angry. And, you look at Pizzagate, and then it leads you to Hampstead Heath, and it leads you to the Franklin Savings and Loan Boys Town scandal with George H.W. Bush. And then you start looking at these satanic cults and Moloch worshippers and stuff. And then on Epstein Island and all this. I mean, it is horrific what people do. Is it actual evil and evil spirits and this kind of thing, or is it just people that are mentally ill? Or is there even a difference? I really don't know. But whatever it is, we have to work against it, I think so.
I just want to interject. Are you ready for questions, or do you?
Yeah, let me try and go blast through here. If you can hold your questions, it's all right. Let me just blast through here as quick as I can. Okay, so anyway, assuming the memo is real, which I tend to believe that if it's not purely real, I think that a lot of it is real. But let's assume it's real. So it confirms a lot of what Stephen Greer talked about. It confirmed what I talked about. And what's interesting, it corroborates Betty Hill's story. So Betty Hill drew this star map, and then Marjorie Finch, this astronomer, figured out, okay, this looks like these stars are pointing to these binary star system, Zeta Reticuli. Bob Lazar read a briefing at S4 that said that the aliens that they got came from Zeta Reticuli, and so those things line up. And then in the Wilson memo they mentioned Zeta Reticuli. So it seems like we have visitors from Zeta Reticuli, and those are the gray guys. All right. Then also like with Bob's story, so it corroborates a lot of what he said. Yes, there's reverse engineering. You know, 1990, when Lazar came out in 89 actually, but 1990 around the time frame, we hadn't reverse engineered anything. We weren't able to get that to work. Now, there may be two kind of fundamental technologies. You have the artificial gravity, where these vehicles can levitate on the Earth's magnetosphere, and they look like they're boats on the ocean. They kind of bob around when you see some of these discs flying. And that, we may have that technology. That may be just pure anti-gravity, but the aliens are able to go at faster than light speed, and they're doing a form of space-time warping as field propulsion using this element 115. And so in that part of the story of that technology, we couldn't make that work in 1990. We hadn't gone that far. So we might have some of this anti-gravity technology, but I don't believe we have all of it. Bob Lazar said it was like, if imagine bringing a cell phone back to the Civil War, you know, and ask them, I need 1,000 of these. I mean, they could use all their scientists at that time. They would get nowhere. They would be not able to make an iPhone. So he said that's the level of advancement that the alien technology is. Now, so as they're trying to reverse engineer this stuff, there's been other whistleblowers at S4. Derek Hennessy was one guy. He said Dick Cheney is in, was at S4. Okay, so Dick Cheney, who we all hopefully agree is one of the most evil people on the planet. So what's interesting, he's outed by, there's a new book called Midnight in Samara, which this guy is a General Ford, is his name. And he's a whistleblower, and what a fascinating story. I highly recommend that book, Midnight in Samara. And he points to Dick Cheney being one of these evil deep state cabal members. Now the Santilli alien autopsy. So what's interesting is a lot of people felt that, you know, that was a hoax. I've looked at that thing a bunch of times, and I got to tell you, it's looking more and more real. And they actually mentioned in the Wilson memo that yes, they did an alien autopsy, and that, you know, again, if this memo isn't real, it's pretty close enough. You know, it's like that's pretty much what happened. I think it's actually real footage myself. But okay, so the lack of intelligence agencies. So thing too, in the playing field, like you're talking about the conspiracy, you have naval intelligence, you have Air Force intelligence, you've got the CIA, the DIA, military intelligence, the NSA, and the NRO, and then Majestic 12 or Georgia 12. And so all of these competing agencies, intelligence agencies, like how paranoid do we have to be? I mean, this is ludicrous to think of the billions of dollars we're spending on all of this, and you know, they're trying to recognize everybody's face to predict, okay, you know, is this guy gonna, you know, is he gonna miss his Zoloft medication and go murder some kids, you know, or something? It's like, I mean, there's a system that's trying to control organic life on this planet. We're putting in a system of like this artificial intelligence or whatever that seems to want to control like biological life. I mean, it's happening on a profound level. And then with these intelligence agencies, all with the guise of national security, again, I mean, what are they afraid of in this regard? Why are we holding these institutions up that aren't doing us any good? I mean, ultimately, like, you know, the government seems to be becoming more and more relevant to some extent because they're just not really helping us. You know, they waste all this money doing God knows what, and to have all these different intelligence agencies. I just don't think we need this much security. I don't think the threat is anywhere near. And honestly, with the extraterrestrials, if they wanted to invade us, they've already invaded us. It's like so. What are we afraid of? I think that maybe Greer isn't totally right that they're all space brothers and they want to come down and, you know, sing songs with us, but I think that probably mostly they're more like tourists on a cruise ship, and maybe they're like scientists. So they're explorers, or they come here to look at the zoo. You know, like look at the funny little humanoids running around killing each other. Oh, isn't that funny? I mean, you know, I didn't know why they would want to come here. It's, you know, the way we treat each other. So we got to have a fundamental consciousness shift in this planet quick. I gotta tell you. Anyway, so these agencies are causing a lot of the problems in my view. But I mean, just look at what Wilson and what he had to go through. You know, and he's not even, his job is to oversee it, and they're saying, no, you can't oversee us. It's like the ultimate petulant child. Okay, so disinformation, here we go, you know, the 80-20 rule, so 20% truth mixed in. They're trying to confuse the enemy, and my problem with it, you look at the Richard Doty, Paul Bennewitz story, and, you know, Paul Bennewitz basically was murdered by Richard Doty to, you know, I mean, not physically, but like Richard Doty just got him nuts, you know, and it's, what a shame. I mean, you know, why did they need to do that? You know, what is this? Why are they keeping this extraterrestrial reality from us? And that's really the big question. Why?
Do you want to tell some people who Richard Doty was? Just throw.
Oh, he was Richard Doty was an Air Force intelligence officer, and he was so Bennewitz had picked up some kinds of transmissions. He was an electrical engineer, and Doty got involved to give this guy a lot of disinformation. And because he had tapped in on some secret radio transmission technology, I think the Air Force was doing, and then so Doty was hired, basically directed to throw him off the track by getting him to chase all this alien stuff, and ultimately, like Bennewitz kind of went crazy over this and ended up killing himself. I think so.
Doty is in Richard Gere's film, Unacknowledged.
Oh, really?
He's interviewed.
Yeah.
There's a fairly obvious answer to that, why the secrecy. Because once the public comes to a realization that the aliens are here, it's not that far of a leap that they're the ones that are running things. And we've been all just the victims of Machiavellian divide and conquer, that all the evil that men do to each other is a system of divide and control.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but for what ultimate end? Like, is it just to
Money, it's all about the Benjamins.
Well,
no, that's it.
That's the God.
There's the thought that they came here to mine gold, but take the
Right.
gold off the planet, of course. Then there's the thought that they're also feeding off
Right,
that
which,
the emotions, the
Right.
fear, the energetically they're feeling off, they're feeding off of that. But that's not my favorite.
yeah, it's that part, you know, yeah.
I'm going to suggest we let Scott finish his presentation because obviously he stimulated some interesting dialogue we'll have in a few minutes. So.
Yeah, we're almost 10 more slides here. Anyway, I'll blast through these. So this just talks about the military-industrial complex, and this is just following some of the money of this. 23 trillion has been obfuscated and taken from our taxes to fund these efforts. That's what Catherine Austin Fitz, who was, she's a finance person, and she worked for the HUD. I think she was a HUD director, and she did an audit with a college, a university, to look for this missing money, and she came up with about 23 trillion that's been obfuscated. You took it, you know, Rumsfeld mentioned 2.3 trillion was missing on September 10th. And of course, September 11th, they blew up the accounting office where that money was trying to be tracked down. Anybody who doesn't think 9/11 was an inside job conspiracy is you know, drinking the wrong Kool-Aid, because the current research seems to indicate that there's definitely, like, Mossad was heavily involved, and even Saudi Arabia. They weren't the hijackers, but they funded a lot of this stuff, and that I wish I knew why they would do that. Was that just about the money? But it's pretty ugly. Anyway, hopefully some of the money is going into the SSP. All right, I just wanted to mention when I worked for Hughes Aircraft, basically the purpose for security, they say, is national security and, you know, go America. But really, it's not about that. It's like you said, it's about the Benjamins, it's about certain people controlling the money. They don't want you to have it, they want to keep it. And so I mentioned before, like when I was hired by Hughes, they do a very serious background check. You had to have a magnetic card for everything. Even to go to the bathroom, you had to swipe your card. And the fines for breaking that oath was, I think it was 12 to 20 years incarceration and a $25,000 fine. So it's pretty heavy, and that was in 1986. My job, I was a laser engineer. I worked on a project called Element 6, which I don't know if it's still classified. I Googled it and nothing came up out of that. So, but it was basically a laser radar for the cruise missile. I worked in a clean room for part of the time, and this is kind of the job that I did. There's various tasks that I had. And this was secret. But what's interesting is that what was really secret, none of the stuff I worked on specifically was secret. The actual physics to how the system worked was available at UCLA. It was a research project for one of the PhD candidates. But what was really secret was the computer hardware in it. They had a processor in there that wouldn't see the light of public for at least a decade after that. So the military is easily a decade ahead, if not more, in technology. So the stuff you're seeing now, 10 years from now, think of what's happened in 10 years. You know, you got glass tablets and iPhones. You know, think about 10 years from now, like how big it can go. So the technology is just increasing exponentially, and the military's already got it. There were 3 levels of security: confidential, secret, and top secret. And again, it's a bit of a game. When you're in the secret program, the idea is that you kind of earn your trust to be able to keep your mouth shut, and then you're given more and more secrets. But sometimes there's a lot of family connections. So, like Phil Schneider, who was murdered, he was a whistleblower. His father, Oscar, worked for the OSS, I think, and so because his dad was, already a card-carrying intelligence guy, it was easy for his son to become a member of that. In fact, a lot of people in intelligence, it's a family connection. So once your family's in, your children are able to get that clearance and get those roles much easier. Let's see. Here. Here we go. So I'll just. Okay. Now let's see. Is this going to play?
Yeah, you have to hit play. You just tapped it. You left your mouse on it. So try to pull it up again, and then just tap it, and take your mouse. There. Well, yeah.
Sorry, it's very twitchy. It worked in the demo.
Yeah, no. I think it'll work. Try it one more time.
There we go. Okay, so this is the famous Santilli alien autopsy. And so when this came out, first like, wow, it's real, and then there was all this speculation, no, it's not real. And so when you read about Santilli and what he said first that somebody sent him the film, all right, and then he said, no, someone sent me the film, but then I made a copy of it. I did my own version of it. I faked it. I did a reproduction of it. And then he said, no, it's real. So he's gone back and forth over time in terms of whether this is the actual autopsy or not. And I got to tell you that, when I worked in Hollywood, I was out there in 91 to 95, and I worked on a number of pretty interesting films. Like I was there during the shooting of Patriot Games, of Coneheads, Congo, and then Stan Winston had this. I had outside my office, I was in the Gene Roddenberry building, and there was a pool parking lot, a tank that was a parking lot, but then they'd filled up with water when they needed a water scene. And so when they were shooting Congo, I had a water buffalo outside of my office in the parking lot, and every morning they would test this thing, and his ears would go like the water, like the mammals, the rhinos and stuff, like the ears would flop like this. It looked so real. It was incredible. This thing would move around, and it was amazing how convincing it could be. So there's no reason why this couldn't have been faked, but certainly it's possible. You can't say one way or another if it was faked or not, but when you look at this, and particularly when they cut the eyes and the brain open, I tell you, it looks so real. And how did they fake it? Also, I think this guy's got 6 fingers, and they found a control plate in I think it was the Roswell crash that showed 6 fingers in the indentation in the panel. It's for 6 fingers, but you count. He's got.
Does he have 6?
Yeah. Look at his toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See his toes. So how would faking a dummy like that? Yeah, I suppose Stan Winston could have done that for a few $1 million, but what was the financial return on this? To think that you're going to risk a couple $1 million making a film like this for no, you don't have a distributor, there's no specific market for this. Could the government have decided, let's confuse the public and do a fake autopsy? Well, I think if they did, I still think that this is the autopsy that actually happened. So it may be a reenactment, but there was an autopsy. That's what the Wilson memo confirms. So there definitely was an alien autopsy. And other people have talked about that as well. I mean, there's more evidence than just that. Like Lazar talked about that being an autopsy and so forth. But when you really look at this, I mean, the burning on the
How
leg.
quick did that happen? How quick did they get this alien on the table from the crash?
Don't know. I've
Had
heard
to
so
take
many different
a
accounts.
year to make that.
Well, here's the thing, right? So if you read The Day After Roswell by Phil Corso, like, he talks about just Roswell in general being that there were so many stories around it, like I mentioned before. Was it Aztec, New Mexico, Socorro? Was it Corona, Roswell? Was it one or more discs? Was it an oval disc? Was it an egg-shaped vehicle? You know, was there a living alien? Were they all dead? You know, there's been a lot of things convoluted in there. So, you know, I don't know what truly transpired. I mean, there's no way to know. But my understanding is that once they found this wreckage, and it was found fairly quickly, it lives into July 2nd to 4th, so when the crash occurred, and they got these, they would have gotten this, you know, about the next day, like on the 5th of July. So this guy's going to be, you know, 2 or 3 days raw at this point.
But it could have been, I mean, there was one live one.
That's right,
supposedly.
right.
So let's hope this isn't the live one, I don't know.
But anyway, so that's a pretty, you know, impressive thing to fake, I find.
If that was real, those people working on the alien would have some kind of a biological air filtration system.
That's, yeah, you would think that. I mean, they do have a suit on. They do have some kind of a hazmat suit. I mean, in terms of there being purely air filtered, completely contained, maybe they would have, but also if that carcass had been around people for a day or two and no one had experienced any ill effects, you know, I could see, well, they might just say, well, just put like a hazmat suit on and you don't need to go to full air containment and everything. I mean, again, it's pure speculation. I do agree that I would have been, if I was a doctor operating on the autopsy, I would want to be completely isolated from it, you know. But there is obviously some kind of, you know, I don't know if they're pressurized suits or not. They don't look like they are.
They don't appear to be.
Yeah, so that's a good piece to be discerning on and say, okay, so maybe it is fake, right? What does it really get you? And again, it's not the point if it's fake or not as much as that, you know, that we know that an alien autopsy did occur, right? And what's interesting is the eyes, when they cut open the eye and they peel back that second lens, that's really impressive. And you look at the eye itself after they remove that contact lens, and
It's like a
there's
human eye.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of really impressive detail to this thing. I've had my cousin's a doctor, and I had him look at this, and my niece is a tech for a coroner, you know, and they were impressed by how real a lot of this stuff looked.
Did you just say that aliens wear contact lenses?
Well, what it is that in the eyes, you know, they have a dark eye, and it's some kind of they think it's some kind of
Like a lens.
yeah, so either like a bright sunlight filter. Yeah, it's not like, I mean, I don't know how it works. I don't know if it's an organic part of them or if it's a prosthetic like we use contacts. But you can see him remove a black lens out of his eye. Let's see. Okay, so what do we really know from this? We know that crash retrievals occur. We're reverse engineering stuff. We know the government covers it up. Secrets can be kept. We do have EBEs, and they come in, you know, at this point, we've got 3-fingered version ETs. You can see that in the Nazca mummies if you haven't checked those guys out. There's 4-fingered ETs, 6-fingered ETs. Betty and Barney Hill, they apparently have, you know, mind-wiping capability. Now, so does our government. So MK Ultra, if you look down that rabbit hole, you'll find out MK Ultra is absolutely real. It's been admitted by the government, and they were doing all kinds of stuff to like be able to mind wipe people and program them. But it does seem that the abductions that are occurring are related to some kind of a genetic breeding program or some sort of evolutionary biology program. Yes, Zeta Reticuli. This is just reaffirming some things we already talked about with element 115 and legitimizing Bob's case here. This is, again, just lining up Betty and Barb. I'm trying to blast these just for time purposes here. Yeah, Zeta Reticuli is only 39 light years from Earth, and a lot of people will go, well, you know, people can't travel from star to star because we can't go that fast. But the thing is, I've been looking at this a long time, and you know, space warping, as you know, they talk about in Star Trek, right? I mean, that's really how it works. That rockets. This Elon Musk is out of his mind. I mean, rockets. This is like 200-300-year-old technology, and we have no business doing rockets. It's ridiculous because you can't get there from here with rockets, right? You have to use field propulsion. You have to bend space-time. And again, Bob Lazar talks about the alien technology and how that works, but they focus magnetic fields, and they're able to literally just compress space-time. So that kind of stepping here, if you step into this part here, and this is compressed space-time, and it's compressed to this part here, so it's basically like you bring that piece of space-time here, so when I step here, boom, I'm here, like in just one step, I mean, continuous movement. So that's how you're able to go faster than light, because otherwise you get into so many problems with G-forces and inertia. How do you compensate for that? So, you know, you couldn't fly in a vehicle going that fast because you'd be squished on the other side of it. So these things are interesting. You go inside a bubble of space-time that's independent from the space-time you're traveling in. So in your point of view, did anybody see, what was that film, The Arrival, where those squid-like creatures came, right? And then they go up into that vehicle, and they're looking up like this, and then they kind of like step and they sort of jump, and the next thing you know, they're tilted 90 degrees, and they're walking on the side of the wall according to that orientation. And that's kind of the way it works, that you're in your own, when you're in one of these vehicles, you're in your own gravity space. So everything that's going around you doesn't really matter. You just think everything's like 1G in your bubble there. Let's see, yeah. Phil Corso, just talking a little bit about that. What's confusing though is because of different accounts of different fingers, different skin tones, and different skin colors, we're trying to always figure out how many different species are coming to Earth. And I think Corey Good talks about like 900 or so. It's hard to imagine that many interacting with us on a regular basis, but if you look at the biodiversity of most animals on this planet, I mean, I could certainly see 20 or 30 different alien species that could be interacting on this planet. Not necessarily all at one time either. It might be you get 2 or 3 at a time, and then some are explorers and then kind of visit, and then they go off to other parts of the galaxy, and others are here on a more permanent basis doing trade or some other agenda. Okay, so disinformation is pretty much proven to corrupt a lot of truth and data and confuses the issue. And then when you add in the agendas of the intelligence agencies, that corrupts things even further. We know through the FOIAs that these corrupting forces exist, and we know that we're able to get some truth out of that method. So anyone who's really interested in doing more research, I think we should follow my friend's advice at the DIA and submit some FOIA requests to them. They're pretty straightforward to fill out. I mean, it'll take you a couple hours. But I think if we start swamping the government agencies with requests, maybe they'll start listening to us. I don't know if we're ever going to get a really clear picture of the reality that we're dealing with until we get declassification and disclosure. Navy is slowly coming clean, which is great. Let's see how the Space Force moves forward. And it's up to us, really, for us to educate ourselves, to get involved, to stop this oil banking, military, pharma cabal of greed and megalomania that preys on fear and lies. Then continue to do research and to try and find out, like for example, they talked about in the memo, like who's involved. It's the best contractor, right? So like, well, who's considered the best one? I mean, the biggest, I think, in my mind is probably Lockheed, but it could be General Dynamics. They make the submarines, Northrop Grumman, of course. And that's just basically like, oh yeah, so to keep being involved. Like I've got a group on Facebook called Tetra, which is funny because all of my work with magnum blocks and sacred geometry is based on the tetrahedron. So it worked out the Extraterrestrial Research Association. So if you want to become a member of my group, Just
That's great.
type this. Yeah, just type. Go to Facebook and type Tetra or the Extraterrestrial Research Association, and you can. Everybody gets joined, except you have to have a profile picture. Like if somebody has a picture of a cat or a cartoon character, and there's no other pictures of them on their site. Like I don't like just pure mythical Facebook accounts. Let's see. Yeah, we have to keep applying political pressure up the food chain. And if you know about the 100th monkey phenomenon, there's an interesting book about by Ken Keyes, and if they say if the stories about these monkeys on this South Pacific island, and once a certain number of critical mass monkeys have the same knowledge, it spreads immediately to the entire population subconsciously, or like through the ether of consciousness. And so maybe just if enough people come to enough enlightenment about the subject and they're asking the right questions, maybe by us getting to that 100th monkey level, that the rest of us will kind of open our eyes and see what's happening. So Greer's got this new film, Unacknowledged. I think it's the new one, and I'm looking forward to that coming out. So support things that are involved in the space. Maintain multiple channels, so don't rely just on Facebook and YouTube. I've been getting censored like crazy. I've been kicked off Twitter like 5 times already. And they're really censoring like crazy. Google, there's stuff you used to be able to get and find that you can't even find anymore. Like Google's just totally taken it out. And even in Google Maps, you used to be able to see certain things like around where S4 was. I used to always look at Area 51 and the surrounding areas, and now they've made that restricted, and you can't get that information anymore. So there's some of the alternatives like Minds.com and BitChute and Gab, some other ones. I'm hoping we can get some competitors to the Facebook, YouTube, Twitter monopoly. And then keep an eye on Q. So I don't know if everybody's hip to Q or QAnon, but I first got turned on to that about 2 years ago, just a month or two after it started, and I was really skeptical. And I'm still skeptical because one of the messages is that sit back and enjoy the show. No. You don't sit back and enjoy the show. You have to be in the show. You have to take steps, and you have to keep people honest, and you have to keep pushing and sharing insights with your friends or getting them to ask questions, because we can't rely on anybody else. It's like people let the ETs come down and solve all their problems. No, it's not going to work that way. We have to do it together. So. Q, I'm hopeful that there's something there and it's worthwhile, but don't expect it to happen for free. Almost done. Okay.
What is Q?
Okay, Q, you can Google it. I can send you a link, but they're the Great Awakening. There's a video on YouTube called Q, the Great Awakening, and that will explain it. And that's very well done. So I can send you a link if you'd like. So yeah, disclosures occurred, changes are coming, granted not too fast. So you gotta choose, do you want to be, like I coined the term the Light Warrior, and that's my name on Google, and I have a YouTube channel called The Light Warrior. So it's like just trying to to share light, but you have to kind of be a warrior to do this, because there's so much fear everywhere in the world. People will try and shut you down, whether it's the system, the law, your friends, your job. People are going to try and shut you down left, right, and center. And you got to be a warrior to deal with some of this stuff, because, sometimes it takes more than you really want to give. And then my future work, what I'm up to right now is, there's technology-assisted consciousness. So the CE5, because I haven't been too successful with that, but I think there's got to be something in it based upon the experiences I did have, that my pal Jerry and some other people were starting to look at in a way of like maybe trying to electronically enhance your brain waves to get technology-assisted telepathy. And so there's some technologies we're looking at, magnetoencephalography and everything. Technology-assisted telepathy is what I call it. There's something called the SQUID, the Superconducting Quantum Interface Device. And I'm working on this, a new type of waveform that I discovered that's coming out of this sphere work that I'm doing. And so I'm going to have a book out, hopefully in January, if I can. I'm almost done. I'm so close to being done. Just have to knuckle down in the next 2 months and finish it. This talks about the specifics of the experience that I had and what it was like when I heard this voice, and then how I took that and I turned it into a toy, and then my experience bringing this in 3 years. I went, from zero to $250,000, and I was in 12 countries, and Toys R Us, and Target, and it was a really incredible story, and then I lost everything. So it's a very interesting story, and if you have any interest in doing like entrepreneurship, there's a lot of insight in there for like how to be an entrepreneur as well, and inventing things and so forth. And then, so spherology. So what's interesting about this, my premise is that everything fundamentally in the universe is based around the spherical geometry, because it's everywhere. You put air in water and you get bubbles, they're spheres. The planets, the stars, the moons, they're all spheres. Spheres are everywhere. And from the sphere you get everything else. So in this, what's interesting about the spherology, what I've discovered is that you can see there's this spiral here. And there's actually 4 spirals. There are 4 different colors. There's green, 3 in this one, sorry, 3. So you have pink, green, and dark red. Okay, so there's 3 helixes here. Now, of course, DNA is a helix, right? Well, what I found out is that you can put 2 spheres at the bottom, 3, 4, 5, 6, it doesn't matter, and you'll get these spirals. And what happens within those spirals, like I said, you get prime numbers out of that. Now that's really just bizarre. I mean, the fact that by stacking spheres and looking at the diameters of the helix to the sphere and prime numbers come out of that, that's remarkable unto itself. I think there's something really special in here, and so I'm doing research right now to try and bring this further. So at some point I've got a Patreon account, and I'm going to set up a GoFundMe account to try and raise some money to do this, because Magna Blocks I funded myself. And it did great for 5 years, and had this other company not put out this bad product, I would be a millionaire right now. And instead, I'm bankrupt. So, I can't do it with my money this time. I spent all my money, so I have to try and raise some money somehow. But there's something very, very special in the spherical geometry. So keep your eyes out for spherology. We'll be doing more work. Everything is going to be through magnablocks.com, because I still keep that domain open. It has a lot of information about the Magnablocks toy, and the book will be put up there as well. And I do have a couple of these. I only have a few sets of these left. If you're interested in getting some Magnablocks, these are collector's items. These aren't made anymore, and there's very few of these left. So I only brought 3 because I've only got about 10 more at my house. So if you're interested, I'm selling these for $20 a pop, but they're collector's items, and you can't get them anywhere else. And also, I just have a couple of CDs, so I'll do anything I can to hawk to try and make some money. So if you'd like to hear some really nice music, I've got a couple of CDs for sale too for $10. So anyway, that's my marketing spiel. And time for questions.
So I know we're gonna have some.
Yeah.
What government agency did Admiral Wilson work for?
Pentagon. So he was an admiral, so he was called the J2.
I thought you said it, but earlier in the presentation, but I missed it.
Right, so George, you can start J2.
Over 5 years of my radio show, a couple of things have been pointed out. One, human intelligence is rather dwindling. Today on KYW News Radio, they talk about a bug squashing app for a telephone. So when you go to a particular area and you squish a bug, you now can push it on your database. How revolting and repugnant. Because we're talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, warp drive, the capacity. We can't get across religion. We can't get across sexuality. We can't get across the barriers of each other. So when an extraterrestrial does come in, if we all remember Star Trek, the Borg, here is an intelligence that is working amongst, and now human beings cannot work with the Borg. It became their enemy. So as we progress in our technology, and we reach out further and further into the stars, Ad Astra, if anybody saw it, produced
the worst sci-fi movie I ever saw.
It's talking about our insanity of looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. which the character of the father of the character committed suicide, basically. But when we get back to what you were going to in conspiracy, we need to look as human beings after 5 years of doing this on radio of who we are. Because this woman here might be Muslim, he might be an atheist. How do we get along with each other when an extraterrestrial comes down?
I totally agree. It's like, how do we, people say, oh, the blacks versus the whites versus the browns, whatever. To me, there's one race, it's called the human race, but even beyond that, it's like, you go law of one, right? That there's just kind of there's just one God intelligence, and we're all just little flakes of that, and ultimately we're going to all be back together in the end. And I think that, that's where we are right now as a species. Is very divisive, and that's because that agenda is being foisted upon us by this evil. All right, so I think that the key is you have to know who you are, and you have to, come back to what, do you want to be a good person, do you want to be a bad person? And if you just constantly move towards being a good person and try to always improve yourself, and don't listen to the noise, like people are saying, bad, evil, hate, greed, you gotta have a new car, you gotta do all these wonderful things that, you can try, and you lead the horse to water and realize you're never gonna make him drink. I had a client where she told me that she was in Chappaqua, and she was saying how she can't tell people she's Jewish because they won't accept her at the country club that she goes to. And I thought, well, why would you want to go to a country club where they have that attitude? Like, what? You don't have to go to that country club. But she was so wrapped up in her materialism that, no, I have to go to that club. You don't understand. I have to go to this club. It's like, so a lot of that stuff's self-imposed. I think, it's about trying to find your own enlightenment within the greater context. And it's certainly not easy, but, you're here and you're giving me a shot at listening to what I have to say, and hopefully I plant a seed there and it'll spread.
Just got a question about the Van Allen belt. So, were the moon landings fake? I'm of the opinion that they were fake because we couldn't get across the Van Allen belt. Still can't get there to this day. Yet you hear this story about, alien based on the dark side of the moon, and the astronauts talking about there was Santa Claus, whatever, and then the radio silence, whatever. So what's your take on that?
Okay, so I looked into that because one, my dad said, yeah, we definitely went to the moon. Two, I went to school with a kid named Willie Van Allen. His dad discovered the Van Allen belt. And
I went to school with Willie Van Allen too. Which school did you go to?
Westminster in Simsbury, Connecticut.
Okay.
I've looked at the math of that because when I worked in the medical laser field, I dealt with radiation in human and organics biology. So what happens is radiation is absorbed in, for example, fatty tissue and in bone. It's absorbed in different kinds, and there's different kinds of radiation: alpha, beta, and gamma, primarily in X-ray. Now, the Van Allen belt is not consistent. It has a topology. So when you can chart a course out of orbit, okay, and you can get through the Van Allen belt. And if you're going like 25,000 miles an hour, which is how fast you have to be going to escape the Earth's gravity, you can get through it fast enough. It would be like getting a couple of X-rays. So that kind of contention that you couldn't survive it because of radiation it's just false. The math doesn't support that.
What about all the evidence that the film that we're seeing of the moon landing was fake?
Well, I know that NASA definitely airbrushes and fakes some of the footage. Clearly, they do that. They've been caught red-handed doing that a bunch of times. But that doesn't mean that all of the footage is faked. It's like, it's almost part of the disinformation. But I know that some of the shots are airbrushed and so forth because they want to get a really nice-looking shot, right? So they'll tweak it to make it look really good for the magazines, for example. So I know that some images are fake because of that. And then there's been some where they've removed the background and so there was like something there and you can see that they removed it. So they're obviously wanting to hide something there. There's some where, there's one footage I know where you're looking out one of the windows of the command module on the moon mission, the Saturn V command module, right? You're looking through one of the windows and you see the Earth out the window, and it looks a lot closer than they're supposed to be. I think that's one of the ones that people have pointed to. Yeah, that one, I'm not sure about that one. That's interesting. Again, I know that they fake some of the stuff, but the fact that you can, there is the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and if you believe any of those pictures, you can actually see where we've landed from that orbiter. But let's say you don't want to believe that. You can, there are people who have, like there are universities who have shot laser beams at the moon where we've put reflectors, and supposedly they get signals back from that. Now, I haven't done it personally, so I can't tell you for sure that happened, but you know, if you want to believe the press about that, which, you know, granted, that's you got to take it with a grain of salt. So
how would you explain that we can't even get there today?
Well, we can get there today. The clown from NASA that said that was a ridiculous statement, which goes to prove that NASA doesn't necessarily have the best and brightest. But so I think what he was trying to say is that the technology that we used back in the 60s to get us to the moon, we don't have that today. Like, we couldn't use that technology to get there today because we don't have it right now. Although I think if you consider SpaceX's heavy launch vehicle, Falcon 9, that can get us to the moon. So, but it's not a Saturn V, and it's, you know, so it's not NASA. So NASA right now couldn't go to the moon because they don't have that same technology. Could they devise the technology to get us there? Yeah, I think we can go there again. And I think we'll be there very soon. I think that's the goal of Elon Musk and SpaceX, is to get us back on the moon in a couple of years. So it's like 2025, I think.
I have something.
Sorry, okay, one second. So someone over here was first.
But that was kind of to that question.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, you said you follow Q.
Yeah.
In one of his answer and question thing, he did say we went to the moon.
Yeah.
Not the way they showed us.
Yeah, very possibly, right. Certainly that there's, if that's true, and I don't know that everything Q says is 100% true. There's clearly disinformation in there, right? Which he's even been admitted as well. So yeah, it may be that we've gone there. I'll put it to you this way. There is, when I was out in Los Angeles working, a friend of mine in the laser business was always saying, "Oh, you gotta come skydiving with me." And so one weekend I go with him out to California City in the Mojave Desert to go skydiving, which was great fun, except I hurt my leg. But when I landed, but anyway, he told me, and this was like 1988 to 89 timeframe. He told me back then about some guys that worked at Skunk Works that he had met skydiving. And again, even though they have secret clearances, people still talk, okay? But they're very selective to who they talk to. So he heard from a guy there about two things. One was about the Aurora and how it worked. And what's interesting is what he told me in 1989. I met a gentleman who worked on the Aurora at Pratt & Whitney on their jet engines, the engines that the Aurora uses. He had the blueprint of the Aurora, so I know that Pratt & Whitney made the engine, the propulsion system. And when he described to me how that technology worked, it's exactly what my friend told me 25 years earlier. Okay, and then the same guy who told me about the Aurora told me that we had a launch vehicle, and this was again 1988-89, that could go to the moon and back in 24 hours. So we have a vehicle, or had a vehicle at that time that could go back and forth faster than, it took us like 3 days, I think, in 1969. So yeah, I mean, certainly I think we get there in other ways. Yeah. Did we not, the question is, did we not go as the Saturn V? Or with the Apollo program? I'm pretty sure we went that way. Yeah, I'm still pretty sure we went that way.
Ben Rich, the head of Skunk Works, told Jan Harzine, who's the executive director of MUFON, that they had the technology to take ET home.
Right.
He spoke at UCLA, and this was 1996.
Right.
So
That raises a really good point. You know, we're all talking, everyone here is interested in UFOs, or you wouldn't be here. And you seem to be an expert on the subject.
No experts.
I've often wondered whether, you know, the United States government has been reverse engineering flying saucers for 60 years.
Right.
I would think in 60 years, if you put the best minds at work, that you would come up with something.
Maybe something, but compartmentalization, the way that works, I mean, you
No,
listen to
wait.
how they did it, and it was not a good approach. They weren't getting good results.
That's not my point. My point is that maybe UFOs are, I think UFOs are real, but maybe some of them are ours.
Absolutely, yeah.
Of course.
You know?
Oh, I'm certain, yeah. I'm sure we have them now, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
We did get the LED out of it.
We've been working on
something.
Well, we have some more questions. Should we go with the lady in the back?
So, talking about leaks, I was curious what your thoughts are on WikiLeaks and what type of information is concealed, maybe to be released at some point concerning the black ops or the compartmentalized programs.
You know, that's interesting. I have read some of the WikiLeaks emails. I read all of this stuff about John Podesta and Hillary Clinton. And I tell you what, when I read that stuff, it made me realize there's some really sick, twisted people out there. And, you know, it opened my eyes. Yeah, she's one of them. I actually met her one time. I met Hillary one time.
You ever explore the murder of good Vince Boston?
Oh, yeah, oh, yeah, oh, yeah.
No doubt in
Oh,
my
yeah,
mind.
yeah. But they were live here, so I haven't looked through all of those. I mean, there's like 10,000 emails. I think there's even more that they have. Yeah, that they can run. So I pray to God that they get him out of there. I mean, what the governments are doing to him, he's a hero to mankind. I mean, we should be storming the gates of Belmarsh prison and, tell the UK government to go F itself, for putting us down. I'm sorry. And Trump should, we got no business extraditing here. For what? For doing his job?
He's not even in the news anymore.
Yeah, I know, it makes me really angry.
He just disappeared.
Yeah. Well, I write the president letters and I write my senators letters. I don't know if it does any good, but it makes me feel
We
better.
probably have time for like one or maybe two more questions, and then we
Did
should
you
pack
say
up.
you were working on a frequency transmission, new frequency
Yeah.
transmission?
No.
That's not the HARP, the low frequency transmission.
No, no,
Okay.
no.
Yeah,
Although
you're
it
not-
may use, one of the components of it is using the Schumann resonance frequency as a carrier wave. So.
Okay. So this is our last question. and then
Are you aware of a researcher, I think he's based in the Netherlands, who has an elaborate, he has taken an approach, I don't know whether derived from yours or independently originated, but using magnetic spheres and the platonic solids to build up a whole theory of how the nuclei, what the nuclear structure of the elements might be.
I'm not sure who that is. I'd love to find out. It's not Garrett Lacey, is it?
No, I can find it for you,
Oh, yeah, I'd love
but
to find out.
there's a remarkable similarity, or maybe someone you could collaborate with, or I'm
Well,
not
I'd
sure
love
if he
to see it,
derived
yeah.
it for you or got it independently.
No, I mean, I think it's like the wireless. There's Marconi is given the patent for wireless radio, but Tesla had the same idea. So I think we're all capable of tuning into the consciousness and pulling it down. So yeah, nothing you do is unique. But yeah, I'd love to find out his name,
I'll
please.
forward it to your email.
Yeah, please.
Great. So I think we're going to go to the diner, Manila's Diner in the middle of Wayne. If you want to continue these Q&As, Scott will be there, or Warren Scott
Yeah,
will be
Warren
there.
Scott, whatever, Warren Scott.
And please help me stack chairs.
Thank you very much.